Okay, recording has started. Um, Let me know if that's nobody wants. If somebody doesn't want to be recorded, please let me know. But everyone's free to ask questions either by voice or by text, of course. If you want to stop me, I'm more than happy to answer questions as they come up or clarify things if needed. But we're just going to pick up from where we left off last week, which we actually got a surprisingly little amount of code done last week because we were talking more about concepts and planning last week, and we did do a little bit of code. This server code is mostly I had this preset up, but we've added a little bit of extra code to it to handle players joining and leaving and sort of setting up the initial game state. And so we're going to see if we can move on. The first thing I think we'll try to do is um, make it so we can roll some dice. That'll be a nice simple-ish thing to do. There's one thing we need to pick up from last week, which is we were talking about when a player joins, we put them in the list, and when a player leaves, rather than removing them from the list and from the game entirely, we actually just mark them as not playing anymore. Um, and that's fine. But if they come back and rejoin the game, we have to handle that differently than if they're joining the game for the first time, because otherwise he'll just keep putting new copies of that player into the game over and over again. So, um, player has joined the game. We need to say, uh, first check if this is a rejoin. And so we can do local found, we'll make that nil, and then we're just going to loop through all of the players that we know that belong to this game and see if any of them are our guy. So we're just looking at if game players p dot id is equal to player, right? They have played before, and in this case, we are just going to flip them back on. We'll just say we want this dot playing is back to true again, and we can break because we don't need to look any further once we've found that person. And so then all we need to do here is we're only going to do this if we actually need to remember this. Found equals p. Where we found this person at? If found equals nil, then they're brand new, and we'll put them in as a new player. But if they're an old player and we've turned them on, then we're going to skip all of this because they're already in there. But either way, we still need to send a player update back to the clients and say, hey, something about the players has changed. In this case, this person is back in the game. That'll probably be indicated on the UI someplace, so they need to know about that. And that's why that's not inside this if, because that needs to go out no matter whether we change the table here or change the table here. It's still changing the table, so it still has to go back out. All right, so we've got that. And let's see if we can figure out how to get some dice rolling. So we've got our project over here, and we've got our 5 dice. And we're just going to start real simple here. We're just going to say we've got dice. They need clickable activators on them is going to be their main thing. So that probably we want on the physical dice themselves, because as the dice move around, actually we'll probably just put them here. These will actually don't need the box collider at all, because we're really probably never going to move those around independently, but ultimately doesn't really matter that much. So let's just do this. Let's open up our die here. This is a prefab, so we can change one of these and change all of them at the same time. So we're going to add a box collider to actually let's just do this without a scripting data component. and just have it tell us where the right object is, because that gives us more flexibility in the future. So we're going to add an element here, just one, expand, and you are acting like you're in debug mode for some reason. That's weird. So we're going to do that. We're going to put that there, and then we're going to pop out. And these should all have, yeah, that seems like a weird Unity 2020 thing that we'll have to look at. This is not applying its custom inspector correctly. Like this shouldn't be here. We should only be seeing this part up here. But either way, it still works. So we've got this, and we need to give that a name. So we'll give that, we'll just call that clickable. That's the thing you're supposed to actually click on to roll the dice. So we need to come back over here to our script, our client script specifically, and we need to do some additional setup. So right now, all this client script does is starts up and then just connects to the server, and that's it. There's no gameplay functionality in here, so we need to add that gameplay functionality. What we're going to do is we're going to come down here, and we're just going to say, I've got a reference to, well, I'm supposed to have a reference to my dice. If I look at my scripting runtime, I've got a reference to my canvas, which is going to have my UI on it, and my dice, which contains all of my dice. So let's get those references set up. We'll say my canvas equals space host get reference to canvas. We'll need that later. And my dice equals space host get reference to my dice. We're going to want to process those dice on startup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new table here called game dice. And on startup, we are going to start by getting a list of all the dice that are children of our dice parent. So this is going to be my dice dot children. And then we're going, autocorrect is really killing me right here. Just children, not dice children. Leave that alone. All right, so then we're going to loop over those, right? We're going to say however many dice children there are, let's look at those. And for every one of the dice, basically what we're doing is over here you can see that like all of our dice are actually children of this one object called the dice. And so we're just going to look at die 1 and die 2 and then die 3 and then die 4 and die 5, and we're going to set each one up in turn, one at a time. So how do we set those up? Well, we're going to need to find the object that they're meant to click on. So what that's going to be dice children d.data get variable clickable is the thing that we're supposed to be, we'll call this clickable part, that we're supposed to be actually clicking on in order to roll the dice. Now you can do this two separate ways. I could come in here to the dice and add a clickable component here. I could say add a clickable, right? That makes it clickable. And then I could come in here and I could manually wire up each of these one at a time on die 5 clicked, right? And I would have to make 5 separate functions: dice 1 clicked, dice 2 clicked, dice 3 clicked, dice 4 clicked, dice 5 clicked, etc. And you can do that if you want to do it that way. I generally prefer to have the dice set up automatically by the script, in part because it's duplicated effort otherwise. So if I do all this manually, it doesn't save me from having to do this anyway. I'm still going to have to loop over all of the dice for other reasons besides setting up the clickable. So if I'm already having to loop over all the dice, I might as well just have the script do all the work for me. So what I'm just going to do here is I'm just going to say if clickable part dot clickable is nil, that means there is no clickable component on there, right? Then we have a function to add a clickable to it, take care of that. And then we're going to say clickable part dot clickable, which we know has to be there now because we if not, this would have added it. And then I believe it's just on click. We can look at our handy scripting reference over here, and we can see that scripting components, if I find as clickable, then yeah, we've got on click to add an action. There's a way to add extra actions if you want more than one thing to be possible to do with the dice, and then you can clear out, and then you can also force a click, which is like pretending the user clicked on it if you want to manually invoke it for some other reason. But all we really want to do is bind an on-click event. And what is our on-click event going to be? Well, we're going to need a function on dice clicked, which die was clicked. And then for each of these, we're just going to add a function here, and it is going to be on dice clicked, whatever the dice number was. And this actually can cause problems doing it this way. I'll explain why. This is a little bit abstract, but it trips a lot of people up, so it's worth talking about it briefly. On die clicked D, this D variable is the current dice that we're looking at as part of the loop. You know, the loop goes, there's 5 dice, so the loop is going to go, all right, first run of the loop, D is going to be 1, second run of the loop, D is going to be 2, third run of the loop, D is going to be 3, 4, 5, and then we're done. So, basic loop stuff. And so that seems like it makes sense, for when D is 1, we're going to be looking at die 1, and we want to pass a 1 into our die clicked event. And when D is 2, we're on the second dice, and we're going to want to pass a 2 into our die clicked event. The trouble with that is that in a lot of languages, functions are what is called pass by reference instead of pass by value. And so a function that is passed by value, when you call a function and you give it a parameter, pass by value means you're not giving it the actual variable. It's actually making a copy of whatever was in your variable and then passing that copy to the function to work on. And so the function gets its own unique copy of it that it can do whatever it wants to with, and it doesn't mess up anybody else because it got its own clone of that variable. There's good reasons and bad reasons to do that, where that might be desirable in some cases and not in others. The problem you can run into is if you are doing pass by reference, which is most of what like C# does and most of what like Lua does, things like that. In some languages like C+ or C, for example, you have to very explicitly tell which one you want to do. But most modern languages try to do pass by reference where possible because it's way more efficient. It doesn't have to allocate extra memory and for that function to access that variable and then destroy that memory again afterwards and clean it up. Especially in something like Unity, where historically it's had problems with garbage collection causes a lot of lag. Then minimizing any time that you need to allocate new memory and then deallocate that memory later with garbage collection is a bonus to getting higher frame rates and a smoother experience and all of that kind of stuff. But what ends up happening when you pass by reference is that you're giving it the actual variable. And so in that case, all 5 of these dice would actually have the same variable. You wouldn't be having dice 1, dice 2, dice 3, dice 4. Actually, when you clicked on them, they would all just be looking at the same place in memory, and that place in memory is going to be whatever D was last set to. And so that means that every die, when you click on it, is going to be treated as if it's die 5 when you click on it, because the loop gets to 5 and then stops. And so D is just for then afterwards forever the value of 5. And that's what all of the dice are going to look at, which can be confusing because you're like, I didn't pass in a 5 to this dice. Why is it treating it as a 5? And so that's if that's confusing, I'm happy to kind of diagram that out, but and it might be a good reason. Yeah, if you want more explanation on that, I'm happy to dive deeper into that. That's kind of like a computer science 101 stuff. I can focus more on the gameplay part if people want and just press on with that, but it's worth just at least briefly touching on that. So let me know if you want me to talk about that more, and I can, but if not, I'm just going to press on with the gameplay part. So hopefully we can get more actual gameplay built, because I know that's what people find most fun.
Jojo, I have a question about the line 17, right?
Okay.
Yeah, can we get rid of those function and that keywords from there? I mean, clickable dot on click, just directly call on dice clicked. Can we do it like this? Is it possible? Because
You
there
mean
seems
you
it's
mean doing it like this?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, that's not going to work. No, what that will do
Mhm.
is that will call the on dice clicked function and then pass its return value to on clicked instead. This would be the
Mm.
same as saying local, you know, on click equals whatever the return value of this function is, and then pass that return value in. And that's not really going to make any sense because, first of all, it doesn't have a return value. So by default, it's going to be nil, and you would just be passing a nil value in. You could have this do a return value, but this would have to
Mhm.
return a function in order to for that to be useful, which you can do in Lua. You can return a function, you know, space.log, I'm a function. You can do that, but because in Lua, functions are just pieces of data, the same as variables. For Lua, it's kind of like every function is a delegate or an action, like in C sharp. In C sharp, you've got the action class, which we call delegates, and you can turn a function, you can create a delegate in C sharp, which is a special kind of function that you can then pass around to other functions. But in Lua, basically all functions are considered delegates just out of the box. And so all functions are data, and you can pass them around like variables once they've been defined. But if you were going to do that here, like there's a difference between this, because I've got the parentheses on it, and I'm executing this function. I'm not passing it. I can take this off, at which point I'm just passing this function in to our onClicked event. But the problem with that is that this function expects an input parameter, and we're not going to get that from the onClicked event. The onClicked event is just calls the function as is, and there's no input passed into it. So if we did it this way, then die would always be nil, and we wouldn't actually know which die we were clicking on. So what we're
Okay.
doing here is we're wrapping this in a new function that doesn't take
Mhm.
any input parameters because we know we're not going to get any, and then we are passing in what we think is going to be the right value to the function that actually wants it. There's other ways to do this. Like you might see some functions where you just predefine on die 1 clicked, for example, and this calls on dice clicked 1, and then down here you can just do on die 1 clicked, no parentheses, just pass the function in, and that would do the same thing. The difference is just predefining 5 functions to do that, and you wouldn't be able to do that in a loop, or at least not without additional work. Like you could do like, now make a die clicked table, right? And this die clicked table now contains all of the functions in numeric order. And then down here you could do on die or die clickable table D instead. That would work, but it's a little bit convoluted. And if you had different amounts of dice, like if I wanted to use this same code on a game that had 6 or 7 or 8 dice, I'd have to add more functions to the down here. If I wanted to use it on a game that had only 2 or 3 dice, then I'd have to lose some of these functions because they don't serve any purpose anymore. It's just a lot of extra manual work for no reason. When in Lua, you can just have it all done dynamically at runtime. I can just say function here, make a new function on dice clicked D, right? And it'll just make a function if it needs it, and it won't make a function if it won't, because it's only going to make as many functions as there are dice. And so if I drop this code onto a game that has 8 dice, this loop's going to run 8 times. If I drop this code onto a game that has 3 dice, this loop's going to run 3 times. And I don't have to worry about predefining all of those other functions. But to get around the pass by reference and pass by value problem I mentioned earlier, all we're going to do is make a new variable called dynum that is equivalent to the current value of D. And when you set a variable equal to another variable, that's always going to be passed by value, basically. Like it's going to make a copy of what D's current value is, but because I'm declaring this as a brand new variable, that's now a unique brand new namespace that is not going to change on the next loop. So I can pass in dynum here and know that that's always going to be 1 for the first dice and 2 for the second dice and 3 for the third dice and so forth. That's not going to change. So that way our dice are all set up. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to come over and we're going to remember this. We made this game dice table up here. And so we are just going to insert into our game dice table. And we're going to, kind of unnecessary, but we'll put number in there. We're going to put object, which is actually dice children D, and we'll put clickable, which is the object that we actually put the clickable piece on there. And we'll probably want to remember other attributes of this later. But the reason we're remembering this is we're going to need to get at these later. Like when the dice roll and I need to be able to actually physically, to actually change the rotation of the die in world so that the correct side is up, I'm going to be able to access, if I want to change die 1, that's, the first die, then that's going to be game dice 1.object is the actual object that needs to be rotated. So we'll get to that. We'll do that part next probably. But that's all set up now. So we have, in theory, all of our dice should be clickable, and they're not going to do anything yet, but we can say space.log die was clicked, right? So we got that. And that means if I come over here, and we can see that, first of all, none of these have clickables on them. So I'm going to play this. And Unity crashed on me because that's how Unity does. Let's get that restarted. That's why I always save before I play, because you never know when Unity's just going to be done for the session. And it's on the wrong monitor, of course. And now it's messed up all of my layout because it was on the wrong monitor. Let's just put all of that back. All right, let's try that again. All right, so we've got these here. Now, before we started this, these objects had no clickable component on there, but you can see now that they're highlighting, which means they should have a clickable component on there. And if I go look at the dice, the actual dice under there, we can see that they have had clickables added to them, and the analytics event comes along anytime you have a clickable. That's just part of it. But that's this, right? We looped through all the dice, and we looked at each one, and we said, this one doesn't have a clickable component on there. We're going to need that. Let's add that on there. And then that should actually do something when I click on it. So if we clear out our console over here, we should be able to see, just going to combine this over here so we're taking up less space. We should be able to see that if I click on this, die 5 was clicked. If I click here, it's die 4, that one's 1, that one's 2, that one's 3. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And each time I click on one, there's doubling up on them, but you can say each time I click on one, it says, okay, I know that you clicked on a dice, and I know which particular dice you clicked on. See, I just clicked on die 1, that was die 5. So that's kind of the basic interface for this game, right? Because that's the main thing you do in this game is you just roll the dice. And when it's your turn, if you want to roll, you just click on the dice and they roll. And then when you're out of rolls, it's the next guy's turn. We will need to add some way for you to say, I don't want to use all of my rolls. You get 3 rolls each. So we're going to need somewhere on the UI that says you're on your second roll, and some way for you to say, oh, I'm good actually. I don't want to use my third roll. I like what I have. Go ahead and pass it to the next guy. So we're going to need like an end turn button somewhere. But that's basically it, right? Is when it's your turn, you click on the dice to roll them. Either you run out of rolls or you press the end turn button and it becomes the next guy's turn. That's pretty much the game. So having the dice clickable is a good step. Let's see if we can get them rolling before we worry about anything else. We're just going to kind of do a really basic way of getting them rolling here. Let's come back here. And let's say we come over here. On die clicked, what's supposed to happen when a die is clicked? Well, let's do 2 things first. Let's have ourselves an isPlaying variable here, and we're going to use this as the way that we opt in. So if I click on a dice, I'm going to use that as if not isPlaying, then I'm going to say they want to join. I clicked on the dice, I want to play, put them in. And we know how to do that. We send a message to the server, and the server handles that. So we can say we're expecting a player joined event, right? And so all we're going to do is we're going to come down here and we're going to say send to the network. And what are we sending to the network? Well, the command is going to be player joined. And we need to send along our name because the server isn't going to get that right. So that's just going to be my player. We'll send our display name. It's generally what we prefer to use. You can also send username, but that might be slightly different for the user depending on whether they've changed their display name. That should be all we need to do because everything else gets sent automatically. Every message going out to the server includes the game ID and the player ID. So that's really all it needs. It's expecting the game ID to know which game to join, the player ID so we can stick them in the table, and what their name is so that we can show them on the scoreboard later. So that's all it needs to know. Player is not joined, and we'll say join. If we are joined, and what we'll do is we'll come up here and we'll add a little thing. So we're already getting all the debug messages that come in from the server, so we'll just use that. All right, so if you click on the dice and you're not playing, that's what joins you to the server. If you click on the dice and you are playing, then we want to roll the dice. And I don't need to send player name along. That's because my ID is already going along, and that's all that matters. So there's that. And then the server over here is going to go, okay, well, if they want to roll the dice, a couple things need to happen. One is we need to make sure it's their turn. We don't want them rolling off turn. So we have that information. We know what whose turn it's supposed to be. So we can say if game dot players game at the current turn dot ID is me. It is my turn. That's kind of a mouthful. We're going to need to be doing that a lot because other than leaving and joining the game, everything else a player might want to do on the game, any other action a player might want to take, is always going to first have to check whether it's their turn or not. So let's just turn that into a function. Let's just add a thing here that's like, we'll just call it game event stuff, right? Actually, this should be over here, and we'll just call this network stuff, right? So we're gonna make ourselves a new function, is player turn, right? And it wants to take a game and a player, and it wants to know whether that's their turn or not. So we're gonna just take our code here, and we're going to say first, we can make this a little bit more complicated. We can say, first of all, is it anybody's turn? If we set this turn set to 0, that means it's currently nobody's turn for whatever reason. Game hasn't started, or all the players have left, or whatever. But it's currently nobody's turn. So that's kind of like an off state for the game. Then that's just false. It's nobody's turn if that's 0. And then otherwise, we want to return. We're first getting what the current turn is, which should never be less than 1. If it is, we checked for that, and it should never be more than the amount of players who have been playing the game. And so this is actually a direct index into the players table. If it's turn 2, it's the turn of the second player, then that's always going to be the second player in the table, the second player who joined the game, and in the order that they joined it. If turn is 3, then that's always going to be the third player's turn, and that's the index 3 in the players table. So we can just take the current game turn and directly use it to index that same game's player list, find out the ID of that player, and if it's the same as the player we just got asked about, then it is their turn. If it's not, then it's somebody else's turn. So that way we don't have to repeat this code over and over again. We can come down here and we can just say, is player turn, game player. We have both of those variables already here, so that's literally it. Like, all right, it is my turn. And anytime I need to check the turn, I can just repeat this instead of repeating all of this every time the player does something, right? Because there's going to be another one of these, like we talked about. There's going to be what happens if the player just wants to end their turn, right? They don't want to use up all of their dice. Well, I got to make sure it's their turn before I let them end it again, right? So that's another place that I'm going to have to check for whether it's their turn or not. And there's some other stuff that we'll have to get to around turn-based things later. But for now, let's just say anytime that a new player joins, let's check and see if game.turn equals 0. So if I join the game and turn is currently 0, that means there was no players before me. It's nobody's turn for whatever reason. There's currently no turn taking place. I'm the first person to join it. So let's just go ahead and make it my turn then. And that is going to be Yeah, it doesn't really matter where we put this, but it's basically going to be turn equals um, number of players. In this case, it's going to be number of players, however many people there are, plus one. Oh, I need an equal sign there. In theory, I should be able to put this back here as well and just do hashtag number of players. That should work either way. But either way, I'm just saying like it was currently nobody's turn. Either everyone had left the game or there was nobody playing to begin with. And so we need to go ahead and say like, well, the first person to join, you're the only person here. It's got to be your turn. And then that will let us go ahead and play with rolling the dice here a little bit, because player turn will come back correct as being like, yep, you joined, it's your turn, go ahead. So how do we actually roll the dice? This is going to be more complicated as we go along, but for right now, we're just going to do a real simple, just randomize all 5 dice and see what happens. It's going to be more complicated later because we don't necessarily want to roll all 5 dice every time the player rolls. Like if they've got their ship, you don't want to roll that. If they've got their ship and their captain, you don't want to roll those 2, right? If they got that ship captain and crew, those need to stay. Don't touch those. If they got all 3 of those, then the only thing you'd be rolling is the 2 remaining cargo die. You can re-roll the cargo die as much as you want up to your 3-turn limit, but you always want to keep ship captain and crew. If you've got it, there's never a reason not to keep it. So that's just going to be automatic. If we roll the die, we look at them, we go like, oh, you got your captain. I'm going to go ahead and mark that one off. And then next time you roll, we won't roll that one. So, but we're going to start first by just getting the dice rolling, right? So what we're going to do is we're just going to iterate over our dice, and that is going to be games game.dice, however many they are. We know for this game that there's a fixed number of dice, right? So I could just do this for this game, and that would be a little tiny bit faster, but it would make the code more tedious to reuse in the future. If you wanted to make a different dice game with a different number of dice, you'd have to go in somewhere and make sure that you changed everywhere that there was a 5 to a 6 or something if you had 6 dice instead. You can kind of pre-do some of this stuff a little bit as well if you want to. Like you could say, if you just know how many dice are available, you could make a variable that's just like how many dice equals 5, right? And then come down here, and anytime you're dealing with the dice, instead of having a 5 there, you could just put how many dice. And anytime, if you wanted to use this on a new game in the future, then you could just change this once, and anything that references how many dice would change along with it. But that's, that information is already here, so we might as well just use it instead of hard coding in the value. Where possible, I don't like things to be hard coded because it makes the code easier to reuse in the future. So this is actually just the number of dice that we have in our game state, and that's 5. We set that up anytime a new game gets created. So we loop over that one at a time, and we say, okay, for every die, we're just going to randomize it. And so we're going to say, for games game dice D equals space math random integer. And these are 6-sided die. So annoyingly, we have to put 1 through 7 here. This has come up before, but just to reiterate it, you have to be careful when you're doing randoms. If you look at like our space.math library, random range takes a min and a max and returns a floating point value inclusive of the max, whereas random integer takes a min and a max, which is exclusive of the max. And so if you want a random value between 1 and 6, if you put 1 and 6, you'll never get a 6 because the max value will never happen. To get a random value between 1 and 6, you have to do space random 1 through 7, and that will give you a value 1 through 6. I know that's stupid, but it is the way it works. So just be aware of that. Lots of math functions can be inclusive or exclusive when you're dealing with sets and ranges. So you just kind of have to be aware of which one you're using. Lua has a built-in math.random, which you can also use. I'm not sure whether that one's inclusive or exclusive. I'm just using ours because it exists. You're welcome to Google that if you want to use math random instead. But either way, we're looping through all 5 dice, and then we're setting each one to a random value between 1 and 6. And then we just need to send that back to the player. We need to tell everyone that the dice has changed. So we're going to send back a game dice event, and we're going to send back whatever the current value of the dice is now that we've randomized all of them. If it's not your turn, we do nothing. We just ignore you. We'll probably want to like give an error or something later, but that'll probably happen on the client side because whenever the turn changes, we'll tell everybody, hey, the current turn is this, the current turn is that. So the client will know whose turn it is as well. And so we'll probably do that sort of user-facing UX experience of like, oh, it's not your turn, play a doo-doo noise or something, and let you know, or flash an on-screen message, let you know, like, yeah, we know you clicked on it, but it's not your turn, so we're ignoring you on purpose. That way it just doesn't like, the player doesn't just click on it, it doesn't seem like anything happens. On the server side, this is just a safety measure, integrity checking, making sure that if we do get a message out of order, out of turn for some reason, that we don't mess up the game, that we're just ignoring it. All right, so die clicked. If you're not part of the game, we join you. If you are part of the game, it should be your turn, so we're going to roll the dice. That message comes up to the server to actually roll the dice. The server randomizes all the dice and sends them back, which means that over here, we get back this game dice event with a new set of dice, and we need to update our dice to show whatever the current dice are. So that's what we're doing here. This is a function we made in the last call, but we never put anything in it. So now we're just going to do that. We're going to loop again through however many dice we have, and we can do this 2 ways. We can loop through our dice table, or we can loop through GameState.dice, right? That should be the same. In this case, we're just going to loop through game dice, make our lives a little bit easier here. So for every dice that we mentioned, that we looked at before, right? Because when we did our startup function, we made everything clickable and then saved all of that information in our game dice table. So that's all here. And now we need to rotate them up. And we're just going to do something stupid here, and we're just going to make a we're just going to make something really brute force and basic here. So we're just going to make a table. It's like dice rotations, right? And then inside of here, we're just going to have a list of vectors. So we're going to say vector new, and we're going to put, oops, I hit a hotkey on something when I was trying to copy and paste too fast there. We're just going to put 6 vectors in there, right? And this is the rotation that needs to be for die 1. The rotation needs to be for die 2, for die 3, die 4, die 5, and die 6, depending on which face is up. So we're just going to keep it really simple and stupid right now. We'd make this is just because this is prototyping, right? Later we'd want to put like some fancy animation in, and we don't have that animation yet. So we just want to get the logic working, and then we can make it look prettier later. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say for every die that we have, we're going to loop through all of our die, and there's always an object associated with that, and we're going to change its world rotation to being equal to, I think we can do quaternion dot Euler, and I believe that takes a vector input. If we go over here to our types, we can look at S quaternion, and we can see that there's a bunch of ways to get a quaternion. And let's see, I don't do it easy to take out that look rotation. It looks like Euler just actually takes the XYZ, which actually makes things a little bit simpler for us in some ways and not so much in others. All right, we can do that. So what we're just going to do then is, instead of vectors up here. These are just tables that contain their rotations. And then down here, this is going to be, let's see, let's make a local die value, we'll just call it value, is going to be equal to the current game state dot dice at position D, and then this is going to be dice rotations value 1, 2, and 3. So we're just taking whatever the XYZ rotations are that we put in here, and we're just converting those to a quaternion, and then telling the game object to rotate that way in world space. All right, and so all we need then is the values that go in here. So we're going to just go look at that. Again, really stupid here. We're just going to say, all right, well, I can see that at this rotation, the 2 is up right here. So I can see that 2 is actually 0, 0, 0. So that's going to be 0, 0, 0 for die 2. If I want 1 to face up, let's see, where is the 1? It is on the back side. So get the right widget here. For some reason not coming up. We can rotate this, and we can see that if the 1 is on top, then that is negative 90, 0, 0. So that is negative 90, 0, 0. And we're just going to do this for each of these, right? It doesn't matter which one of these that I rotate or which way that I rotate it. That's 3, right? So that's 0, 90, negative 90, 0, 90, negative 90. And then we rotate it this way. 5 is up right there. That's 0, 90, negative 180. 0, 90, negative 180 for that one. Let's grab one of these other ones. If I rotate this way, then I can see that 6 up is 90, 0, 0. 90, 0, 0. And so now I just need the 4, which if I just grab one of these, 4, what is that going to be? Well, that's 0, 0, 90. 0, 0, 90. All right, really stupid fast prototyping here. Just get a rotation that has the right side up, throw it in there. Let's see what happens. So let's save this. Should we save that again? Because as I said, Unity crashes a lot. And we roll, we play here. If we did that correctly, let's find out. So I shouldn't be part of the game now. So when I click on one of these, I can see that a message was, I clicked, and then I got a message from the server. And that message back from the server is a list of game players, and that list of players is a table that contains me in it. My name is blank. That's a editor bug. Don't worry about that right now. And then I don't have a score currently because I just joined. I am playing, true. There's no past rounds, so I am part of the game. So that means when I click on this, I should say, okay, you are playing now. Oh, you know what? We forgot to change one thing. That is, we need to set this is playing to true, or it's just going to keep trying to join us over and over again. So we're just going to do it here and just say is playing equals true. Just force it to true right there. All right, so click, I am playing. I click again, and it didn't do anything. So we need to figure out why it didn't do anything. Probably the server is confused about whose turn it is or something. Because you can see I'm clicking the dice repeatedly, and it's not getting any additional messages back from the server. So we need to figure out why that is. We know we're sending a message to the server. We're sending a message roll dice to the server. The server has a roll dice here. So probably this is not correct for some reason. Maybe we messed up when we set the turn earlier. Let's just go ahead and is our logger on? Our logger is not on. So let's go ahead and turn that on so we can see what the server is doing. And then we are going to, right here, we're going to logger.log. And just for debugging purposes, current game state, anytime we get a message from the server, we're also going to output what the current game state is. And that's going to have to go down here, actually. That's going to be games game, just so we can see what the server is working with. And we'll play this again. And we click, and we join, and we click again, and we can see the server got a message. It did get a message, says, hey, you should roll the dice for this player. And we can look and see what the game thinks its current state is. It is, for this game, current turn is 1, round is 0. The dice looks like it may have rolled them. If we click it again, incoming message. Nope, the game state is not changing. Don't know why that's a 6 though, if that's the case. And the players are in the list. I should be turn 1. All right, we're going to have to poke at that a little bit and see what the logic is missing here. We know it is game. Let's see if it is even making it past. It is your turn. Let's see if we get that SCC server. It is your turn. Let's see if we get that message back. If not, then we know exactly where the problem is. For some reason, the game thinks it's not our turn. Oh, you know what? I bet I know what the issue is. Well, we'll check in a second here. Let's see if we clear this and then we roll it. Yeah, we're not getting any message that it's our turn. For whatever reason, the turn check is failing. So let's go have a look at that. Is player turn, game player, why are you failing? Oh, right. This should be equals 0, not equals 0. Just a logic error backwards on that one. All right. Well, you can actually see the dice did update themselves. They started off as all 2s, and for whatever reason, probably because we manually stuck it in there, all games start off with a state of 1, 6, 1, 1, 1. So the dice adjusted themselves for that. Now let's see if we can get them to actually roll for us. Yeah. So now when I click on these, the dice are actually being randomized by the server and then sent back to us. So I can just click on any one of these dice. For the current moment, it doesn't matter. Clicking on a specific dice doesn't have a difference when we're clicking any of the other ones for this game. I was just saying, just roll it. Just keep rolling. Any dice that I click on is me deciding to roll. We might change that later, like as we hold dice off. We say, oh, you got your ship, you got a 6. We're going to move that off to the side and you can't click on it anymore. If you get your captain, we're going to move that off to the side and you can't click on it anymore. You know, it's going to be, might be important later which one we're clicking on, but right now we can click on any dice and they happily roll for us. Like I said, very basic, no animations, no sound effects, just all basic prototyping. But hey, we know that a couple of things now work. We now have turn control over whose turn it is, and we can now join the game, which we couldn't do before, and we can now actually tell it to roll the dice on our turn, and the server goes, okay, I know which game you are, and I know who you are, so I know which player you are in that game, and so I'm going to roll all of that game's dice and then send them back to you. And because this goes back to everyone, then anytime that I roll the dice on my turn, everyone in the region is going to get that message of saying, hey, here's the new dice, here's the new dice. And so everyone should be seeing the exact same dice that I'm seeing as well. Obviously in the editor, there's just us, but once this was uploaded, we can upload this right now and we should have the same functionality. I can go into a region, click on it, start rolling, and everyone else in that region should see that rolling. I realize that seems like a lot of work to get to the point of being able to roll the dice, and we have so much farther to go still. But it's it builds, right? We had to take care of some infrastructure stuff. We had to do like the turn checking and the turn building. Well, that's done now. So as we add more game capabilities, we don't have to keep repeating that same effort. And as we build, it'll just get faster and faster, and as more functionality comes online. Because the main bulk of the game is going to happen right here. The next step is, all right, you rolled the dice. Now we have to look at the dice and see if they're important. You know, did you have a ship before you rolled the dice? No. Well, do you have a ship now that you've rolled the dice? Did you have a captain before? No. Well, do you have a captain now? And that's just going to happen automatically every time you roll the dice. Is just checking, saying, I know what you had before. Has your circumstances improved at all by rolling these dice? And then we're also going to have to say, like, okay, well, you've used up the maximum number of rolls that you can have. And so you're just stuck with what you have. And the nature of this game is that if you get through your 3 rolls and you don't have a ship, a captain, and a crew, that's a 6, a 5, and a 4, then you just get a 0. Your turn's over. You don't get any score at all if you did get those 3 basic things. And if you reach the end of your turn, or you choose to manually end your turn, and you do have those 3 things, ship, captain, and crew, then your score is just the value of those 2 remaining dice after we exclude the ship, captain, and crew. So let's see. Let's look at more things that need to happen on a turn-by-turn basis. So we know whose turn it is. We know what round it is. A round goes up after every current player has taken a turn. We know what the current dice are, but we're only supposed to get 3 rolls at a time. So we need to keep track of how many rolls you've done on your turn so that we know when you've run out of those, right? And so whenever you roll, if we come down here and say dice roll, then we can say, all right, you rolled. And so now we are going to increment the number of rolls, right? And then we're going to check if game rolls is greater than 2. You know, you can make that equals 3 if you want. Doesn't really matter how the logic works out, but you used your, let's see, well, that was your last roll. Your turn is over for better or worse, right? And so we would need here to do end of turn calculations. And end of turn calculations are, did you get your ship, captain, crew? If yes, you got how many points did you get? Add those points to your score, move on to the next person's turn, right? And that's the same thing that would happen here. And so since we can see that that might happen in 2 different places, we better make a function out of it. Otherwise, we're just going to be repeating code and have to debug 2 different things at one time. So we're going to need some functions up here. We're going to need a function that says go to next turn, right, for some game. We'll need that. That's going to be a little bit more complicated probably than it sounds like, because it's not just incrementing the turn, right? We can go ahead and look at that, where we say basic version of going to next turn is going to be games game dot turn, right? If we need to make it the next player's turn, is a +1, but we can't stop there. There's a lot of reasons that might not work. Like for starters, if games game dot turn is greater than the total number of people playing, well, that doesn't make sense, right? So in that case, we loop back around, and it's now back to the first person's turn again. So we start at player 1, and we go to player 2, and player 3, and player 4, and player 5, and then we go, wait, there is no player 5. Start back over again at player 1, and repeat the whole cycle over again. So very basically, we have to do that. But even that's not good enough, because we have this thing we talked about earlier where we said there might be a player in the players table, but they're not actually playing. They might have withdrawn at some point, and so they're playing value might be false. And if that's true, we want to skip them and go on to the next guy. So we're going to come in here and we have to deal with that. Now, there's a couple of ways you can deal with that. We could make this a recursive function, which nobody likes, but you could do that. You could say something like if games game dot players games game dot turn dot playing equals false, right? Oh no. Then just call myself again, just do it all over again, and keep going. That works in theory, except when do we stop? Like, we have to consider the possibility that all players have withdrawn. And if all players have withdrawn, then we have just created an infinite depth recursion, which is basically like an infinite loop. But the difference being an infinite depth recursion will steal all your computer's memory and then crash. And an infinite loop will just lock the program up forever, and it will never be able to do anything else beyond that. Both are bad. So whether you do an infinite recursion, or whether you do a recursion, or whether you do a loop, at some point you have to say, there's 4 players. I tried this 4 times, and I couldn't find a player who was active. I got to give up, right? So we're not going to do recursion right now because that's a whole thing that's, if we're going to talk about recursion at some point, probably should be its own call. So we're gonna do a loop, and what we're gonna do is we're just going to put a fixed number of times that we're going to try this. So we're going to do a loop where we say try equals 1. How many times are we going to try? Well, we're not going to try more times than there are players, because that then we'd be, if we're player 1 and we want it to be player 2's turn, and we look at player 2 and they're not here, and we look at player 3 and they're not here, and we look at player 4 and they're not here, that's trying 3 times out of 4 players. So we loop back around and we try the player whose turn it just was and say, are you still here? And if they're still here, well, it's your turn again. Then you're the only player, so you can just keep taking turns over and over again. Or if they're even gone at this point, then that's the last one we're going to look at. Like, even they're gone, then there's no point in in continuing to look more beyond that. So we're not going to try for more times than there are players. We know that right off the bat. So we're going to try. Get rid of this. We're going to try 4 players 4 times, and we're going to increment the turn and make sure that we didn't go over the total number of players, and then we're going to make sure that person is actually playing. So if we say games game dot players games game for the current turn, whatever we've just set it to here, if they are playing, then we're just going to break the loop and call it good. If they're not playing, that means we're not breaking the loop, and it's going to try again and try again and try again. And in fact, we're not going to break the loop. We're actually going to return here. And we're going to do that because that means if we successfully increment the turn, we're just done. The whole function is finished. There's nothing else to do. But that means if we get through all the maximum number of tries, and we're like, that person's not playing, that person's not playing, that person's not playing, that person's not playing, this return will never happen, which means we're going to come down here. Oh no, nobody is playing anymore. And in that situation, we're just going to set turn back to 0, so the game knows that it's currently nobody's turn because there's nobody playing. Whoever was here has left. It's an abandoned game. And so we'll want a way to restart the game at some point, both when a game is finished, you want to play again. But also, if you come up to an abandoned game and you're like, oh, there's nobody here, better restart it so I can start fresh, then we'll want that as an option as well. But that'll come later. So turn changing, probably more complicated than anybody expected, but that's all the stuff that you have to pay attention to when it's the game. So we'll need that function in a couple different places, but then we're also going to need another function where we say end of turn check, right, for some game. And what is this going to do? Well, check if they have a ship, captain, and crew. That's a 6, a 5, and a 4, right? If yes, score is remaining 2 cargo dice added to their total score. If no, their score is 0 for the turn, and we put a 0 in their rounds table, right? That's basically what we're doing here. And VS Code likes to just autocomplete everything. And finally, go to next turn, right? So we're going to find out the results of our turn. Did we get it? Did we make a score? And then once we know what the results of our turn are, it's time to be the next guy's turn, right? So the very last thing that this is going to do is go to next turn for whatever the game is. And that means down here, we can simplify these. Like I've chosen to end my turn. So I'm just going to do end of turn check here. I guess that probably needs to pass in the player, not just it doesn't need to because it knows, yeah, it knows whose turn it is. It knows which player is that turn. So you can just pass in the end of it. It is my turn, but I want to quit. I insist. Right? This is I've elected to end my turn. However, up here we have you don't get a choice. You have no more rolls left. Your turn is over. Right? In this case, I've simply used up my 3 rolls. I have no more rolls. The turn is over whether I want it to be or not. Whether I like what I have or not, my turn is over. This is, I haven't used up my rolls, but I like what I have, so I want to stay with what I have. I'm deciding to stop my turn. Both cases have to do the exact same thing. Check what you got, check if you can score, send it on to the next guy. And so both of those can just call the same function regardless of why your turn is over. The same thing needs to happen. And so then we just have to decide how we are keeping track of ship captain and crew, right? So we might just want to do something like we could just like reorder the dice table if we wanted. That's one way. We could keep track of which dice is the ship, which dice is the captain, which dice is the crew, and then just not roll those. There's a couple different ways that we could kind of think about it. So what we're going to do is we're probably just going to do that latter one just because it probably seems a little bit easier and it'll be more useful for the client side to be able to do like some special effects. Like, you know, if the client side gets told like, oh, die 2 is the ship, then we could do something cool on the client side and like actually turn it into a ship or something, right? Like we could put a little ship model there with like the die, you know, at the top of the mast or something. You know, we can do all kinds of fun things on the client side if the client knows which die are the important ones and why they're important. And so on any given turn, for example, we might say ship, we don't have that yet. Captain, we don't have that yet. Crew, we don't have that yet, right? But we might have those as we go along, so we'll figure that out. And then that means up here in the end of turn check, what we're checking for is if games game dot ship is not 0 and games game dot captain is not 0 and games game.crew is not 0, we can score. Or we can't score. We get a 0 if we don't have if we don't have all 3 of these filled, then we get nothing. But if we do have all 3 of those filled, then we can score, and we need to figure out what that score is. So what is my cargo going to be? Well, I am going to loop over my dice and games game dot dice do need an end there. If D is not the ship and D is not the captain and D is not the crew, then it must be cargo because it's not one of those other things. So cargo equals cargo plus whatever the value of that dice is. So we scored cargo score. Whatever's in the cargo variable here is how much score we made for the turn. And because you're always going to get some score for your turn, it just might be 0, then what we might want to do is move this up here, and then we can actually just get rid of this, and cargo just defaults to 0. If we don't have all of these and then add some value, some cargo value to it, then it's just going to be 0, and that means we always scored whatever cargo is, even if that's 0. At which point we would say, okay, well, games game dot players, we have to up their score. Whose score do we have to update? Well, it's whoever's current turn is, right? And then we have to say their score is equivalent to that again. This is one of those annoying things in Lua where in a higher order language you could just do like plus equal and not have to write the same thing twice, but Lua doesn't support plus equal, so you always kind of have to write the whole thing out. Value equals the value plus whatever you're adding to it, so it ends up looking a little bit cumbersome, whereas it would look a lot cleaner in some other languages. We got that right. And then we also need to add it to their rounds table. So we're gonna go over here, rounds, toss in whatever cargo is. Okay, that's changed, that's updated, and then we go on to the next turn. Now we're gonna have to tell people the score has changed, and we're gonna have to tell people that it's a new turn. There's some things we need to think about when it's a new turn, like we got to reset all of this, right? So actually, whenever the turn changes, then whether we goes to nobody's turn or not, we actually need to make sure that we set for, like, you know, for example, the ship back to 0, the captain has to go back to 0, the crew has to go back to 0. We can leave the dice alone. That's fine. It'll just continue showing what the last person rolled until the next person rolls. So we don't need to touch that. But like, for example, rolls has to go back to 0. It's the next person's turn. We need to start them over at, you haven't rolled yet. You don't have a ship captain and crew yet. Your dice or whatever the last guy left you, right? So a lot of this stuff has to be reset on each turn. And so we're resetting this, we're changing the turn, and we're changing something about the players. We're changing a lot of stuff. And so in this case, it probably makes sense, rather than sending a piecemeal update back to the user, oh, here's players, here's dice, here's some other stuff that changed, right? Just send a total game state update. It's a new turn, a whole bunch of stuff has changed, and you need to get right with it. So what we can do here is we can just say, we can either have this returned back to the back to this script here and have it do it, or we can just make it do it itself. There's some redundancy there that we're going to want to weed out if we do that. But let's say if we just come down here and we just repeat the everyone response. Actually, let's not do that. Let's do this. Let's say end of turn check. We know it's going to be the end of turn. So we can actually just do all of this here. We're going to do two things here. One is we're going to say we don't want that here because that would be redundant. We're only sending the dice by themselves if that's the only thing that's changed. But if everything's changed, if it's end of turn, then we're going to send a game state update, and that is just literally everything about the game. Because if the turn's changed, we've changed everything, including some player stuff. So, and then we also just need to send the game state down here if we've manually end turn. All right, so that takes care of that. A bunch of stuff gets reset. It's maybe somebody's turn. The game on the client side will handle saying, oh, it's now this person's turn, because they'll know whose turn it was, and then they get an update, and they're like, oh, the turn now is different than what it was, so I'll change my UI and make sure everybody knows that. And then we add scores and we add rounds up here, and we go on to the next person. So that's most of what happens on a turn. We have to come down here and say, okay, how do we set ship captain and crew? So we're going to want to say, it's your turn. You rolled, and check if they have ship captain crew down here. One thing we're also going to want to do is we're also going to not want to roll those dice if they're already taken. And that's the same logic that we have up here, right? So we can kind of borrow this as we're saying, roll the dice unless the dice are the ship, the captain, and the crew, in which case don't roll those. We want to skip those. So we got that. We're not re-rolling any of those that come up as good for us. But how do we set these? So we're going to want to say, all right, well, if game dot ship is equal to 0, they don't have a ship yet. Find one. Now we're going to be doing a lot of finding. Does this die exist? So what we're going to do is we're going to actually come up here and we're going to make ourselves another function. And we're going to say function find unused die game and the die that we're looking for, right? So we're again going to loop through our dice here. And we're going to say if those dice aren't ship captain or crew, then they're unused. But also, we have the extra caveat of we're not just looking for any die that's unused. We're looking for a die that's unused and is a value that we care about. So we're going to say also games dice D is equal to whatever die value they asked about. So it is, and we're just going to return back D. And if we don't find anything, we're going to return back nil as a failure. That doesn't exist. So we're going to need that. And we're going to come down here and we're going to say, okay, they don't have one. So let's see if they have one. We'll say local find ship equals find unused die in the current game. And we're looking for a 6. 6 is the ship. If find ship is equal to nil, well, we'll say it's not equal to nil. We found a ship. They've got one. So at that point, we say game.ship is equal to whatever find ship is, because that's the particular die that is currently a 6, and we're going to lock it down so we don't roll it anymore, right? Now down here, we are going to say if game.ship is not 0 and game.captain is 0, that means we have found our ship, but we have not yet found our captain. And that's important because we can't find our captain until we have a ship. You have to get them in the right order. So if this failed to find a ship, then it doesn't matter whether there's a captain. We don't even need to check because you don't have a ship. You can't have a captain. And so we're going to then just repeat the same thing down here. We're going to say they do have a ship, but not a captain. And so we can just repeat this and say, well, if we're looking for the captain, that's going to be a 5. So can we find an unused 5 somewhere in our deck? If we can, then great, we found a captain. And one more time, we're going to take all of this and copy it again, and we're going to say, if they have a ship, and if they have a captain, but they haven't found their crew yet, their crew is still 0, they do have a ship and a captain, but not a crew, right? So then we have to find a 4, because a 4 is the crew. And so we come down here and we say, see if you can find a crew somewhere in the remaining 3 dice. If you do, then set crew to that dice. Now, those can all happen on the same turn. They could happen on multiple turns. They could not happen at all. If you never happen to roll a 6, then none of those will ever happen at all. If you happen to roll a 6, 5, and a 4 all at the same time, then it's going to go, okay, randomize the dice. Yep, there is a 6 there, so we're going to make that the ship. Yep, there is a 5 there. We're going to make that the captain. And yep, there is a 4 there. We're going to make that the crew. Or you might just have a ship, and in which case it's going to go, yep, you don't have a ship, but I found one, so we're going to save that. You do have a ship, not a captain, but I can't find a captain, so nothing goes on from here. And if we get down here, it's going to say you have a ship, but not a captain, so I'm not even going to look for the crew. And that really is all it needs to do. When your turn ends, that's where we come back up here and say, all right, turn's over for whatever reason. See if they have a ship, captain, and crew. If they have a ship, captain, and crew, add up the other dice that aren't those, and that's their score. Add them their score, send it on to the next guy's turn, and keep going. So that's kind of most of the gameplay. We're going to want to build a UI for this, and there's some other stuff that needs to happen, like how do you decide who wins, right? There's kind of a couple ways to play ship, captain, crew. One is everybody gets one turn and that's it, the game's over, and whoever has the highest score wins, but that's kind of boring. So probably we'll do something like play a fixed number of rounds. We play 4 rounds, and whoever has the highest score at the end of 4 rounds, that person wins. That's one way to play it, right? Another way to play it would be to have an unlimited number of rounds, but you're playing for a target score. Like, say, the first person who goes past 50 points, then the game's over. And whoever has the highest score at that point wins, probably that person. And all of those work similarly, but with differences. And they have differences on how the UI works, right? If we know that we're always going to only have 4 fixed rounds, then we know that our UI is going to be a fixed size with a fixed number of rows. That's kind of nice in one respect. If we go the total number of points round, that might be over in 4 rounds. It might be over in 14 rounds. Just depends on how much people score each time, or whether they score at all on their turn. So then we would have to build a UI that's flexible and can have an arbitrary number of rows added to it as the game continues. So we'll figure that out for the next one. We're kind of at time here. I don't want to go any longer. I think we've already gone 90 minutes. But we've made a lot of progress today. We have basically the game. Next time will just be like, okay, determining when a round has ended, and then determining how many rounds we're going to go, and then saying, okay, well, we've reached whatever that threshold is. We're done. Game over. Ta-da! Particles, fireworks, ship cannons going off, whatever we feel like making as sort of a celebration effect at the end, and then building the UI that shows all of this to the player. So probably a couple more parts, at least, to this, but we're making good progress. I'm going to go ahead and end it there, and stop recording. So thank you all for coming. If you have any questions that you want to ask, I'm happy to stay and answer more questions after this, but I know it's late for people, so I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and then we can do a Q&A if you want to.